Welcome to the Underhood Service Podcast. This episode is presented by Mala, manufacturers of engine components, filters, and peripherals. Visit mala-aftermarket.com to learn more. And now, here's your host, Andrew Markell.
Welcome to the Underhood Service Podcast. I'm Andrew Markell, the Director of Content for Underhood Service. Today with us, we have Ron McCrum from Mala. Welcome, Ron.
Andrew, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss gaskets with you and some of the installation and myths that we've learned throughout the aftermarket world.
Ron, what's your title and what do you do for Mala?
I'm the gasket product team coordinator, and what I do for Mala is help coordinate the daily activities and what we're going to do for product, for additions, and how we overall balance the product sets and contents here in Mala. With the team.
So this sort of brings us to our first question. How does an aftermarket gasket set differ or is the same as a OE level engineered gasket?
Well, the main difference I believe from the aftermarket to the OEM is the aftermarket gasket sets are designed to be an all-in-one solution. When we design gasket sets within the aftermarket, we use OE type information to ensure that we include everything within that one package. So when you're going to do repair, you're not running back and forth to the OE to get different parts. And also, some of the, when we do put stuff in the set, there is no quality difference. All of our gaskets are designed to be the same OE form, fit, and function as the OE supplier. Some of the other advantages, which with today's expanding market, there's a great increase in distribution centers. So through the increase in distribution centers, the availability becomes even greater than the OE dealer, especially if you're out in the suburbs. There's so many different places to buy gaskets now.
As far as the different gasket sets that are available, I mean, there's a complete set if you're doing the head, if you're doing an intake manifold. What are some of the options a technician has out there for a set?
So, like I said, we have, like you had mentioned, we have the head sets, we have the lower sets for the bottom half of the engines, and we have a couple different options actually for manifold sets. We have, your basic manifold installation set. Then we have expanded manifold installation sets that it will include every single washers and O-ring and gasket you'll need from the first bolt removal to the completion of the project.
I guess with technicians is they have certain myths or beliefs that they attach to a job that they're doing throughout the years. I mean, they have a lot of experience. What are some of the myths and beliefs that some technicians have that they should really be busted?
So probably one of the biggest myths that's still out there that, and this relates to older days and older gasket technology is that in today's gaskets, you still need additional chemicals and RTVs. The gasket's design has changed so much throughout the years that additional chemicals and RTVs are no longer needed. If you do need additional chemicals or RTV, the aftermarket gasket sets are now designed, they will come with that additional RTV or chemical you'll need. But in most cases you won't. Some of the other myths, is concerning fasteners. Today's fasteners have changed also dramatically. There's a lot more torque to yield type gasket or head bolts and bolts. And these can't be reused. Once they stretch, they're not designed to be reused. And some of our technicians out there, I think, still try and reuse them. When you do that, you're not going to get a complete seal. A couple other things. Petroleum-based cleaners. Gaskets are, when they seal, the first initial contact's based on friction. And when you use a petroleum-based cleaner to clean these surfaces, it creates a thin film, petroleum-based film. So you never create that friction, and the gasket never initially seals like it was intended to. So the number one rule of thumb, clean and dry. You want your surfaces to be clean and dry when you install the gasket. And along with the contents, like I'd mentioned earlier, the gasket set contents, when we design this, it's every gasket's in there should be reutilizing. When you take off some other components, them gaskets and O-rings get deformed, and if you try and reuse them, you're gonna create additional leaks.
So you're talking about certain O-rings that can become deformed, like on some water pumps.
Water pumps, thermostat housings. Once that gasket's in there and it's sitting there and it's already been torqued down, and you release that pressure, it's going to have a deformity to it.
As far as with a gasket installation process, what are some of the steps that a technician might not understand or not complete properly from the OE's instructions or the gasket manufacturer's instructions?
Probably one of the most common problems is, the improper torque specifications in the sequence of torque. Say, like I'd mentioned earlier, the torque to yield bolts, they're very specific with how they should be torqued down, lubricants to use on them if you should or shouldn't, which all that can be found within the OEM service instructions. And then again, surface preparation, clean and dry, always number one. Keep the surface that you're installing the gasket to clean and dry. Additional sealing compounds, they're not needed. And I think one of the things that I think is disrupting the gasket, the proper gasket installation processes, is with the advent of social media, we have a lot of people on social media now showing people how to install gaskets. A lot of these people are not qualified to show you how to install a gasket. There are some great social media videos out there for installing gaskets from reputable shops. So I would kind of look for that if you must use social media. Let's make sure you're using it. You're looking at somebody that actually has experience installing them gaskets, because there's so many people now, they just say, well, I want to make a video. This is the first time I ever done this. And they're going to lead you down the wrong road, and you're going to end up with a leak.
So you mentioned before clean and dry. How does that apply to thread locker compounds and also sealants?
So I'm glad you mentioned, the thread lockers and sealants, because some people don't understand that they're really different. So we'll go into like thread lockers first. That's kind of an anaerobic product. It's meant to fill the void in your threads. And when it does that, it cures to a hard thermoset plastic. Is kind of the idea of what's going on there. And once it's happened, it locks that bolt in, prevents unwanted movement or loosening of the fastener. And these are available in different strengths. And when you reference your OE instructions for installing your overall sets, it'll tell you the type of strengths you could use. It could be the blue, the red, the green. But there's a difference. So we also have a thread sealant. Whereas a thread sealant is used mainly on bolts that's going to be in contact with a constant liquid of some sort, whether it be coolant or lubricants. And this thread sealant, this is more like a paste type material. Also cures through anaerobic reactions, but instead of just locking the threads, it seals and locks the threads at the same time. It also acts as a lubricant as you're installing the bolts, so that kind of helps in that direction. But it's quite a difference between the two, but some people get them too confused.
So Ron, what are the most critical tools a technician needs to have in their toolbox if they're performing gasket replacement?
Well, I'd say top of the list would be, have a good quality OE service manual or equivalent to use. Because if you're not going to do the repair and have all your torque specs and your sequence of events, you're leading to an area where you might, have an additional leak that you didn't start off with to begin with. And then we talked earlier about some cleaning the mounting surfaces, clean and dry. In order to do this, you got to have some good tools, non-marring tools. As a good quality gasket scraper. So a lot of the engines nowadays include a lot of aluminum type blocks and stuff like that. So the old razor blades of the past don't work the same. There's some good quality non-marring tools that has more of a plastic compound or a hard surface compound that'll clean them surfaces. Other tools you're going to need is a good cleaner. Back to the clean and dry, and I'd mentioned non-petroleum based cleaners. Good examples of that is brake cleaners and contact cleaners. They don't contain additional petroleum products, so you're going to get a good clean surface that does not have additional film on it. Torque wrenches, as we had mentioned earlier, torque wrenches, the torque sequences and the proper torque, so you're going to have a good quality torque wrench. And then when we talk about tools, we talked about some of the critical tools we do need, and probably one of the ones we don't need that's been used, and we've seen this come back on some of the gaskets and we've had here is using quick cutting rotary tools to prepare the surface. These quick cutting rotary tools, they actually can do more harm, especially when you're talking on aluminum. I mean, that surface, when you start that quick rotary cutting, it actually can deform the surface. You no longer have a straight surface, a straight edge. In addition, this throws, residue in all different directions. That residue can get into areas you don't want it into.
So what about roll-lock disc as far as, is there a certain color or a certain brand or kind that you could use, or don't use any rotary tools at all?
Yeah, I personally wouldn't recommend any other high cutting rotary tools. There are some that that I know that are being designed to help with the surface preparations, based on different metals, and I'm sure they'll perfect that. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
What are your suggestions for a technician to remove a gasket? Is it a chemical tool?
Yeah, I would say a good chemical cleaner, and once again, non-petroleum based cleaners. Some of the good options is a brake cleaner or a contact cleaner, and you use that in conjunction with a non-marring tool. It takes a little longer, but in the long run, you're going to have a much better surface preparation, and it's not going to lead to additional work.
Mala has a very interesting tool for removing gaskets.
Yeah, well, so last year, it was introduced into the retail market. Mala came out with its own gasket scraper tool. It's called a JV2. This is a really cool tool. It's a 4-in-1 type scraper. So, not only is you going to be able to do your gasket scraper, we can mention a few other things you can do with this. So it has double-sided. So there's a scraper side on each end of it. They're both vary in width. So depending on the area you need to get into. Built into this is a really cool little RTV tube squeegee. So we've all had that moment where we get to the end of the tube and you can't get that little bit out, so we just kind of throw it away. With this tool, you can actually take a standard size RTV tube and put it through this built-in slot we have. Pull it through, and it actually squeezes all the remaining RTV to the end. Also has a durable nylon bristle brush, so this helps when you're actually getting down to that last little bit of gasket residue that's on your surface. You can actually scrape it off with the nylon brush also. So that's all the functional parts. There's some added features to this. It's kind of directed towards the technician and our day-to-day needs. First off, it's a bottle opener. Who don't need a bottle opener at the end? It also has like a nice little handle at the top. This helps for stubborn jobs. You can actually grab the little knob at the top, so the gasket scraper is not slipping through your hand. It gives you something good to hold on to. Get a better scrape. For convenience, we also have there's a magnet in the handle. This magnet in the handle, this was designed so you could just put it on the side of your toolbox, and you won't have to dig through the drawers later on to find it. So it's readily available. There's also, if you don't want to put it on your toolbox, there's actually a peg hole in it, so if you want to do peg hole storage. The overall function of this, though, and the real intent of it, it's, this is one of the safe tools that you can use to remove gaskets. It's safe for use with all chemical strippers. The chemical strippers will not deteriorate the material that it's made of. And then most importantly, it won't damage the critical sealing surfaces that you're working on.
So technicians are seeing a lot more MLS gaskets on vehicles. How exactly does an MLS gasket seal the combustion chamber and head?
So MLS gaskets, is becoming the standard in the OEM market right now. And the way they complete the seal is they're designed with 3 to 5 layers of steel. This is usually a stainless steel. It's a high quality stainless steel that springs back. And the way they design, the MLS gaskets are designed now, they require less torque to tighten them down. And by using less torque to tighten these down, you're also going to limit bore distortion. Okay. So the current design of them is an overall plus.
Technicians are seeing a lot more MLS gaskets in the bay. What is an MLS gasket, and how is it designed by the OEs and also the aftermarket?
Yeah, so MLS gaskets, which is multi-layer steel gaskets, are becoming the norm in the OE engine applications now. What they really consist of, these are thin layers of 301 or better stainless steel that comprise of an active and stopper layers. They're made of quality spring steel. They're designed to be installed using less torque. By using less torque, we're going to limit bore distortion. And then the overall goal of using the MLS gaskets is to create a 60 to 40% sealant ratio between the combustion chamber and the coolant and oil ports.
So with these multiple layers, do the different layers have different functions?
Yeah, so we'll first talk about the active layers. So your active layers, which is really your two outside layers, these have embossments on them. And these embossments help to seal around the coolant, oil, and combustion chambers. But with being a 301 stainless steel, which is spring kind of like a spring-loaded kind of steel, what happens is as the head in lifts or creeps, you maintain a constant contact with that spring steel. So the steel is designed to rise and lower also as the head lifts or compresses. On them outside active layers, most gaskets will have a FKM coating. It's either going to be entirely coated or it's going to be sealed around your major sealing areas. And this helps create a great sealing surface between your two areas. And this is on a microscopic type level. So the other layers we discussed was the stopper layer. This stopper layer, what this does, this further enhances the combustion chamber seal to maintain that 60 to 40% desired sealing ratio that we want to attain between your combustion chambers and your coolant and oil ports. How we do this, you do this by controlling the compressed thickness around the combustion chamber, and this is done through the use of folded over or welded combustion rings. Also, the number of stopper layers can affect the thickness of the gasket, and you might want, the thickness of the gasket might be based on your application or the compression ratios you're desiring to attain.
So you've got multiple layers, multiple coatings. What does a technician need to do when they prepare the surface of the head and the block?
So surface preparation is very important. On an MLS gasket, the days of old, you could get away with a much rougher surface when installing the old composite type gaskets because they are more forgiving. With MLS gaskets, the surface preparation, it must be much smoother. We're talking down, a roughness average of 60 or below is what we'd recommend. Also, the surfaces must be clean and dry for the actual FKM coating to create good contact at the initial torque down of the gasket. Some of the other things you want to consider, not everyone thinks about the bolt holes before putting in your head bolts. You want to chase some bolt holes, make sure they're also cleaned out before, so you get proper torque when you do torque down the heads. And we'd also recommend you don't want to reuse the head bolts. Almost all modern engines are using torque to yield head bolts nowadays. And with a torque to yield head bolt, once it's installed and you use the proper technique to torque them down, they do stretch. And we remove them, you're never going to get that back. So you want to replace them.
With gaskets, there's a lot of fasteners, a lot of bolts, a lot of torque specifications, and even torque sequences. Where should the technician be going to get that information?
Well, firstly, you should always try and use a OE service type manual for that. If you don't have the actual manuals, in today's data world, there's many subscription services that service technicians can subscribe to. Some of these All Data Mitchells. There's probably a number of other reputable services you can subscribe to that'll actually give you not only the torque specifications but the sequences to torque them bolts down, the sequence to install and remove the head gaskets to prevent minimal damage, even on removing them. And actually today some of the OEMs offer subscription services also. They can be pricey, but in the end, you're going to have a good quality data link to how to properly install gaskets, what your proper torque sequence is. So you do the repair once. Also, when we talk about where to find the proper torque specs and installation instructions, we had mentioned some of the subscription services. There's a new trend out there now with social media. A lot of people, instead of finding them proper channels, they're using social media to try and do these repairs. Social media is great in some aspects, but what we're finding out is there's a lot of people doing social media videos that are not properly qualified, or they don't know the proper torque specs. And we have found that some people are following them channels to install a gasket. And if you're not getting that social media link or feed from a reputable shop, what's going to end up happening? You're gonna have the wrong torque specs. You're going to do the wrong sequences. So we want to use a good quality or reputable OEM type subscription service, or social media link in order to install them gaskets. And most importantly, not only torque the proper torque of the boats, but let's make sure we torque them in the correct steps.
My experience is with service information that's free, it's generally not accurate.
That's right, and I say there's a lot of people just want to put their face and name out there nowadays, and they make social media videos for everything on a whim.
So you said something very interesting before we started this podcast. Every gasket tells a story.
One of the major stories we see, when we talk about surface preparation, and we'd mentioned earlier in the podcast, about the using of the high-speed cutting wheels. Probably one of the things we see the most on that is, I talked about how them high-speed cutting wheels can cut into the surface. Well, what happens is, even in this FKM coatings that we're using on there, when you torque down that head gasket, all them impressions of that high-speed cutting wheel actually gets transferred to the gasket, and they create porous leaks. So we've had gaskets come back through that we've examined afterwards, for leaks, and trying to determine if it was the material of the gasket, or and sometimes say the gasket tells a story. And that particular story shows the improper installation due to surface preparation.
So Ron, we're at the end of this podcast. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Andrew, and thank you much also for this opportunity to discuss this with you.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Underhood Service podcast for more episodes, and visit us online at underhoodservice.com.